Hey, it's Eggwink, and in this video I'm going to explain the details of how damage is calculated against enemies in Gunfire Reborn. It's actually pretty simple, but it's not really explained in-game very clearly, so there's a lot of common misconceptions that newcomers have. So first we need to talk for a second about the difference between multiplicative scaling and additive scaling. Again, this is pretty basic stuff, but I just wanted to visually show the difference so you know what to picture in your mind when I say it scales additively versus multiplicatively. So with additive scaling, each buff you add, well, adds the buff as opposed to multiplies. We can see this visually. The horizontal axis here represents a weapon's base damage, which you can see in the menu by pressing tab, and the vertical axis represents a hypothetical actual damage done to an enemy after all the scrolls and buffs, etc. So if I keep adding values here as opposed to multiplying, you can see the line does increase, but after a certain point, adding another item doesn't actually give you that much more damage. Spoiler alert, this is how the scrolls and ascensions and everything works when they say like plus X damage percent, so like plus 50% damage, plus 100% damage, all those values add together. So it's good, you should definitely go for those, but after a certain point, you're just getting another plus 50% or whatever added on top of your plus 300%, and it's not going to make as much of a difference as some of the other things we'll cover in a minute. On the other hand, with multiplication, you get a graph that gets very steep very quickly. So as you can see, after multiplying just a few times, the graph gets insane, and every time I add a new one, the slope literally doubles. This is the kind of scaling that we're after. Okay, so now that you understand the power of multiplication, let's look at the actual damage formula. The actual damage dealt is the base weapon damage times buffs, which we'll cover in a second, but it's basically damage from scrolls, ascensions, and talents, times crit X, which only applies when you're hitting weak spots like headshots, times the lucky shot chance, which I'll explain that too. But before I go into detail on each of these, let's just take in the big picture first. You can immediately see that these four elements are multiplied together. So, to deal the maximum damage possible, you actually want to spread out these numbers as much as possible. Let's look at a hypothetical example to see why. So, you pick up a Glimmering at the beginning of the game, which has a base damage of 135. All of these stats just start at 1 at the beginning of the game, but let's say you ignore everything that will give you crit X and lucky shots, and you don't ever hit weak spots, so crit X and lucky shots stay at 1. But you go for these buffs and pick up every single scroll in the game that gives you damage boosts. We'll just put in a random value of 20, so you have 19 scrolls that give you plus 100% damage. There aren't even enough scrolls in the game to give you that much of a buff value, but we're just shooting high to give an example. So that gives us a damage output of 2,700. Now what if, instead of focusing purely on buffs, you spread out these numbers and focus as much as you can to upgrade everything? Well, with just a few points in each, we've already far outclassed the damage we were doing in the last example. So hopefully you can see why it's important to focus on each of these stats to get the most damage possible. It's never going to be that straightforward in game, you can't just trade points back and forth, but this should help you make decisions whenever you have to choose between a few different scrolls, inscriptions, or rerolling Geminis. Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty. How are each of these values calculated? Well, base damage is simple, it's just the damage listed on your weapon in the tab menu. To use another example, the golden bow has 300 base damage. For the buffs, all of these are the plus damage percent that you get from scrolls, ascensions, and talents in game, with the exception of the fish or bear paw, which I'll cover in a second. But other than that one scroll, anytime a scroll says 35% damage or plus 100% damage, or when you use the effective element type against the right color health bar and you get plus 50% damage, or you have the talent which gives you plus 50% damage, or an ascension that says after using cleave you get plus 100% damage for X seconds. All of these plus percents are added together to get the buff value. So in this example that says plus 335% total, and the plus means that you add it to the original 100%, giving you 435%, which is just 4.35 for multiplication purposes. Okay, quick note on the fish or bear paw scroll that I mentioned earlier, because the wording on that scroll is a little confusing, and it doesn't work the same way as the rest of the scrolls. So the description says minus 50% weapon damage, but the damage is dealt twice. It should really say your damage is halved instead of minus 50%, because it doesn't subtract from your buffs the way the other scrolls would. It actually just halves your total damage. So this is still a super good scroll because your total damage per second is exactly the same, and your on-hit procs and elemental effects will happen twice as often. But yeah, just wanted to clear that up. Okay, back to the video. Now, crit X is just the crit X value of your weapon, which again you can see in the tab menu. A good way to increase this is with an inscription, and there's also a talent you can buy with Soul Essence that gives you a permanent plus 25% buff, but we'll just keep it basic, and the golden bow has a crit X of 4. Finally, lucky shot is slightly more complicated because it happens randomly when you shoot. So the stat that you can actually get from scrolls and stuff is called lucky shot chance, which starts at 0, meaning you'll never hit a lucky shot. But there are scrolls and ascensions and talents that can increase your lucky shot chance. If you have a 50% lucky shot chance, half of your shots will have 2x for lucky shot, and the other half will be normal or just 1. Once you get to 100% lucky shot chance, every shot will be a lucky shot, which gives you 2x always, basically doubling your damage. But the cool thing about lucky shot is your chance can go above 100%. So if you have 150% lucky shot chance, every shot will be at least a 2x shot, but half of your shots will actually be 3x lucky shots, up until 200%, when all your shots will do 3x. And the same thing goes all the way up to 4x. So if you somehow get 300% lucky shot chance, all of your damage will just be multiplied by 4. So yeah, that's basically it. Hopefully you have a better idea now of how the damage system works in Gunfire Reborn, and you'll better be able to prioritize which scrolls and ascensions to choose in-game to achieve the maximum damage possible. I hope the video helped. If it did, feel free to leave a like, and if you have any other questions or corrections, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Let me know if there's any other details or mechanics that you want me to cover in a future video. Peace.